Back in 2016, the second greatest basketball player of all time, Michael Jordan, was challenged to a shooting exhibition at his annual flight school camp by NBA star Chris Paul. The stakes were this: if MJ missed 3 shots, every kid at camp would then receive a free pair of Air Jordans. Well, as most of us know, MJ is a highly competitive person and tends to take things personally. So he proceeded to make every single shot, leaving those campers without a damn thing. And from there, a legendary meme was born on the internet, a photo of MJ with 3 simple words quoted over it: "Fuck them kids." And that sentiment definitely applies to the kids in this week's film as well. I'm Brandon O. This is Terrorific, and we're chopping up 1984's Children of the Corn. Welcome back to the place where it's perpetually spooky season. This episode is brought to you by DFW Landscaping Services, your local experts for complete outdoor solutions in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. From routine mowing to full front and backyard transformations, they keep your curb appeal sharp and your weekends free. Their team specializes in custom hardscapes, vibrant flower and tree beds, and total lawn care tailored to the North Texas climate. They believe in being built for Texas and designed for living. Reach out to Matt and Cody today for a free quote at 469-389-0333 or visit them online at landscapingservicesdfw.com. That's 469-389-0333. Let's build something great together. Now, of course, my preference would be for you to be a recurring listener, but if you are new here, better late than never, welcome. But just so you know, this season is all about breaking down the horror film adaptations of the works of Stephen King. So be sure you're following at Terrorific Podcast on Instagram, because every Thursday leading up to a new episode, I post a clue to what movie that episode will cover. And if you guess correctly, I will shout you out in that episode. This week's clue was an image of the continental United States with a location pin dropped in one of the Midwestern states, specifically the Cornhusker state, Nebraska. Now, personally, I would not have been able to identify Nebraska based on its outline alone, but who cares? Whatever, this isn't about me. So congratulations to the people who are good at geography and were able to identify Nebraska despite it not being labeled. My intention was to get people to big brain themselves, however, into thinking that Children of the Corn would be too obvious of a guess, and therefore go with another Stephen King film set in Nebraska, 1922. Well, multiple people did indeed fall for that trap, but 2 others followed Occam's razor and went with the classic. So those with the correct guesses were another reoccurring person now, Rick, from the Whole Damn Enchilada podcast and YouTube channel that covers everything related to horror movies, including new releases, classics, unboxings, etc., and new to the guessing game. And coming out swinging, we have Mika G, creator and host of Cinematic Nightmares, a YouTube channel that celebrates horror through the movies, moments, and memories that shaped her love for the genre. Mika also hosts monthly horror trivia game nights. Sometimes they're teams and sometimes they're individual. And not to toot my own horn, toot, but I have been a recurring participant in those game nights, and earlier this summer I finally added an individual dub to my multiple team dubs. Let's fucking go. But Mika is often looking for new contestants, so check her out on Instagram for further details on the next game night. Links to the socials for both Cinematic Nightmares and the Whole Damn Enchilada, as well as their latest pieces of content, can be found down in this episode's show notes. But now, let's get into The Children of the Corn. The film was adapted from Stephen King's 1977 short story of the same name, first published in the March issue of Penthouse that year. Look at Stephen King out here writing for the OG Gooners. How do you go from beating your meat to reading about kids worshiping a demonic corn demon thing? Wow, talk about range. And not to get too deep in the weeds here or too deep in the corn stalks, but how does that even work logistically? Like, do you wait for your boner to go away before you read these stories, or are you just reading them completely bricked up? You know, how do they structure the segue between the two? Do you just go from Bush on page 75 to here we go, now we're walking through cornfields on page 76, or is it like a gradual transition? You know, what's like a middle ground between looking at pictures of naked women and reading horror short stories? Questions that need answers. You know what? Let's think about this for a second. So let me Google real quick. When was Viagra invented? Okay, it was first synthesized in 1989, patented in 1996, and approved for use by the US FDA on March 27, 1998. Okay, so if I am the editor of Penthouse in March of 1977, I'm thinking it would make the most sense to put these horror short stories at the beginning of the magazine, get those out of the way first, because if you're reading them and you get scared, your heart starts beating faster, the blood starts pumping faster, probably makes it easier to shunt that blood down to your dick. And so if my clientele doesn't have access to that little blue pill and they may be experiencing some ED, being scared might make it easier for them to get bricked up while they're viewing these images of Miss March spread eagle. Talk about a palate cleanser, but I digress. Children of the Corn was later included in the 1978 collection of short stories Night Shift, which I am currently reading, but I haven't yet made it to that story. If you're a returning listener, you're probably wondering what's taking me so long to read this fucking book. Well, let me tell you, I only pick it up a couple of times a week, so progress is slow going, but there is progress. This is now the fourth film adaptation I've covered so far this season whose source material came from Night Shift, joining Maximum Overdrive, Cat's Eye, and The Mangler, so I recommend giving those episodes a listen when we're done here if you haven't already. Children of the Corn was directed by Fritz Kirsch, and its screenplay was written by George Goldsmith, with Children of the Corn being their most well-known film. Stephen King wrote the original script for the movie before it was rewritten by Goldsmith after producers' displeasure at the fact that King's version started with 35 pages of Bert and Vicky arguing in a car. King allegedly argued that Goldsmith did not understand the horror genre, and Goldsmith countered that King did not recognize that film is an external experience, whereas books and short stories are internal experiences, with visuals only existing in the reader's mind. And personally, I think Goldsmith's argument is pretty weak because film is definitely an internal experience as well. We don't see every single thing laid out for us on screen in every single movie. There are plenty of times where things are hinted at, implied, or happened off screen, or, are left to our interpretation. So yeah, saying that only books are internal experiences is factually incorrect. My bad. All that talk about Viagra and being bricked up and beating meat to nudie mags. Apparently I have dickceptioned myself. Pause. But anyway, the cast of Children of the Corn includes Peter Horton as Bert, Linda Hamilton as Vicky, John Franklin as Isaac, Courtney Gaines as Malachi, Robbie Kiger as Job, and Anne-Marie McAvoy as Sarah. But Linda Hamilton apparently had a very fruitful 1984 because later in that year she would go on to star in another small little film you may or may not have heard of called The Terminator. Side note, do you consider The Terminator to be a horror movie? I think I do. I mean, it's a sci-fi movie, but isn't sci-fi a subgenre of horror in some, if not most, instances? Because the thought of a time-traveling killer robot sent to murder me is very terrifying from my point of view. Despite being set in Nebraska, the Cornhusker State, Children of the Corn was actually filmed in Iowa, but due to the season, the corn stalks had to be painted green and propped up in order to appear living. Shout out movie magic. The film was made on an estimated budget of $800,000 and grossed about $15 million at the box office, so it was a commercial success. Critically, however, it was less successful. The film holds an average rating on Letterboxd of 2.7, and I rated it 1.5 stars myself. I thought this shit was more boring than menacing, and with a concept like this, it should have, been dripping with menace. I mean, creepy kids are inherently scary, right? Like, you don't have to really do very much with the kid to be scary. They can just stand there quietly staring at you, whatever. Just their presence of just seeming off somehow can get the mind running. But somehow the kids in this film, with a few exceptions here and there, just seemed kind of uninterested with what was going on, and yeah, I wasn't really feeling it. But let's dive into the plot. So, The Children of the Corn takes place in Gatlin, Nebraska. It opens with a little boy named Job narrating the scene 3 years prior to current events. He's the only kid in church that day because all the others are out in the cornfield with a kid named Isaac. Job's dad wouldn't let him go because he didn't like Isaac. Crops have been struggling lately, so the town is praying for a bountiful harvest, and Isaac has other ideas in mind. Job's sister Sarah was homesick with her mom after coming down with a sudden fever, so Job and his dad go to a diner when he sees some other kids, indicating that their meeting with Isaac has concluded, but they were acting creepy as hell. Side note, Job orders his usual, which is a strawberry milkshake, and he took out the straw as soon as he received it. I feel like restaurants, bars, etc. should start asking if patrons want straws instead of assuming that they do. Because why the fuck would I want to put my mouth on something a stranger's dirty ass fingers just fondled? And from a business perspective, this would also cut down on overhead costs since these places wouldn't be wasting so many straws and needing to re-up as frequently. Just a thought. But hey, maybe that's just me, considering the exorbitant amount of people who claim to be running around in these streets just gobbling up ass and putting their mouths on other things that strangers have just fondled. But inside the diner, a team named Malachi makes eye contact with another creepy ass looking kid outside the diner window, and they nod at each other. This kid outside is wearing a wide brim felt hat, Quaker style, and he is Isaac. Another boy comes in the diner and locks the door while the adults are drinking coffee, just chatting it up, but suddenly they begin choking and the coffee appears to have been poisoned as they collapse, dead. Malachi and the other kids pull out sickles, knives, etc. and slash the throats and chop up the adults who weren't poisoned. One dude gets his hand shoved into a meat slicer, which seems completely over the top and unnecessary, while another gets cleavered, leaving Job as the lone survivor. Job's dad was talking to his wife on the diner's phone when he got, and as the phone dangles on its cord, we hear her ask, "What are you kids doing?" before she screams. Meanwhile, Sarah is lying in bed in a feverish haze, but she drew a picture depicting the diner bloodbath and other murders around town, plus a picture of kids seemingly worshipping Isaac and doing some pagan shit out in the cornfields. Stephen King really loves his psychic kids. Jump ahead 3 years to present day and we have a couple in a hotel room. They are Bert and Vicky. And Vicky brings Bert a cookie or a super flat ass piece of cake or some kind of pastry in bed since today is his birthday. So she wakes him up out of his what appears to be a very peaceful and deep slumber, presents him with his birthday treat, which has a candle in it. He blows it out and she asks him what he wished for, and he says to live happily ever after. And she's like, oh, is that a proposal? And he says no, like a fucking savage, bro. But hey, nothing makes someone want to propose more than their partner pestering them about why they haven't proposed. Vicky then presents Bert with a gold-plated lighter as a birthday / med school graduation gift. And okay, I am a person who's big on gratitude, okay? Like, if someone gives you a gift, you should be grateful. They didn't have to do that. And you should express that gratitude to them. However, I think some gifts can be ass, and you can think this internally without necessarily sharing that with the person who gave it to you. If you want to pretend that you love it, that's great. But if I received a fucking lighter after I busted my ass for like 8 years finishing med school, and then the same person has the audacity to ask me to propose to them after waking me up from my sleep on my birthday. Nah, dog, we gotta have a conversation because that shit is not popping. I feel like the scene would legitimately be like one of my versions of hell because Vicky then proceeds to play some music and put on a dance and karaoke performance. Like, bro, I just woke up. I don't have time for this bullshit. How do you have so much energy right now anyway? What are we doing right now? But it's not all bad because she does put on this performance while wearing a little nightie, and she climbs on top of Bert trying to smash him. But at that point, dude's over it, so he's like, nah, I'm good. I need to take a shower before we hit the road. They're driving to Seattle because that's where Bert is going to be doing his residency. So yeah, it doesn't appear that Vicky is going to be getting that ring anytime soon. Dude is turning down birthday sex. That is an enormous red flag. In most cases, let me not generalize for everyone. I'm sure there are instances where people don't like being ridden first thing in the morning, or they don't want their morning wood sucked, to each their own. But I would say in most cases, declining those activities probably isn't the best indicator for the state of the relationship. So Bert and Vicky hit the road. On the way to Seattle, they are passing through Nebraska, and they turn on the radio, and there's someone preaching about there being no room in heaven for fornicators, homosexuals, or drug abusers. They laugh, and Bert sarcastically says there's no room for college graduates or people who watch public television, before Vicky chimes in saying there's also no room for commitment, which is absolutely unhinged. I mean, this dude literally just finished med school. He has to be in debt up to his eyeballs, and Shorty is applying pressure like this on his birthday, no less. Crazy work. But at the same time, part of me does respect it because closed mouths don't get fed. However, the timing of it maybe could have been better. All right. Another person's birthday isn't about you. It isn't even about y'all. It's about them. So maybe waiting 24 hours or so would be a better bet to then apply pressure about this ring. But as Bert and Vicky drive, they pass a road sign saying they're 7 miles out from Gatlin. Meanwhile, in the town, a kid named Joseph decides to run away because life under Isaac's rule sucks ass. I mean, yeah, if I was being governed by a fucking 12-year-old, I would probably want to leave too. Low-key though, setting aside the whole mass murder of every adult in town thing, the fact that a bunch of children were able to survive on their own for 3 years is pretty impressive. So I guess Isaac, he deserves a little bit of credit for that. And I wonder if this serves as a little bit of a commentary regarding the role of parents when it comes to raising children. I mean, in my opinion, a parent's role is highly critical. You know, speaking from personal experience as both a former child and a current parent. But what if a parent's role is so critical because we either deliberately or subconsciously or arbitrarily withhold the life skills these kids would need to function on their own? Is there a certain amount of ego associated with being a parent? Like, we feel the need to be the ones that kids can't live without. And I mean, I'm definitely not advocating to send 8-year-olds out into the workforce or anything like that. I'm just saying, you know, there probably are things that we teach kids later on in life that we could teach them earlier in life to make them a more self-sufficient, well-rounded individual. But left to their own devices, I guess there's a chance they might establish a corn cult. So, double-edged sword. Job and Sarah want to run away with Joseph, but, and I'm paraphrasing here, he's like, nah, y'all little motherfuckers will only slow me down. So he packs his suitcase, runs off into the cornfield, and gets himself stabbed and slashed and fucked up. Cut back to Bert and Vicky on the road, and they're looking at a map to navigate, but notice that Gatlin is conspicuously absent, despite them passing signs for it on the road. And while they're distracted, they don't notice Joseph has run out into the road in front of them, and they absolutely demolish this kid. I mean, holy shit. Like, Bert tried to brake, but he didn't try to brake until he was like 3 feet in front of Joseph. So he just wrecked this kid. And once they come to a stop, Vicky's like, oh my God, tell me that was an animal. What? She knows good and damn well that wasn't no fucking animal. She was the one that pointed him out in the road to begin with. Like, oh, Bert, look out. Bro, nah, that's a kid. He's cooked. So what's next? Well, Bert gets out of the car and goes to check the body, and he notices that Joseph's throat has been slashed, and he's a doctor, guys, so he knows that if you hit someone with your car, absolutely pancake them, odds are their throats probably won't get slashed. So he's thinking that something is very wrong in this situation. But bro, imagine breathing a sigh of relief after running over another human being with your car because you notice that apparently they first got murdered. You know, someone sliced their throat open and they were dead anyway before you finished the job. That is absolutely unhinged behavior. But Bert goes to the trunk of his car and retrieves a tire iron to investigate the area of the cornfields that Joseph emerged from, and he sees his suitcase laying there. So he goes in to retrieve it. And while he does so, someone is secretly watching them from the corn. It's the teen who slashed Joseph's throat, Malachi. Bert and Vicky get to driving again after this vehicular manslaughter, and Vicky wonders if Joseph could have gotten his throat slashed in some sort of farming accident, but brand new Dr. Bert is like, nah, it looked like it was slashed deliberately. He explains that blood begins to coagulate in 4 minutes, and the splatter that he found on the suitcase was still fresh whenever he grabbed it. Bert wants to open the suitcase just in case there's some sort of clue in there, but Vicky is like, hell nah, let's go find a house or a phone to call for help. All the kids in Gatlin are supposed to be living in some kind of communal space, but occasionally Job and Sarah sneak off to their old house to hang around and play games. So they pop over there and they're playing Monopoly, and while they're doing that, they make a joke about Isaac landing on the go to jail spot and how he's going to get locked up LOL, super funny. But then Malachi pulls up on him and throws his big ass knife down into the game board before hauling them off to go see Isaac. Big snitch energy. Up to this point, they've been forgiven for being non-believers because they weren't in the cornfields that day when he who walks behind the rows revealed himself. But Malachi is a hater, so he snitches big time about them playing Monopoly and how they were talking shit about Isaac going to jail, how they were also playing records because music is a big no-no, and then he hands over one of Sarah's drawings that shows Bert and Vicky's car 2 miles outside of Gatlin. Isaac says Sarah has the site, so that's another reason why he wants her and Job to remain unharmed. There is one adult who remains alive in Gatlin. It's the mechanic. He struck a deal with Isaac to provide them with fuel in exchange for his life. So Isaac instructs Malachi to go tell the mechanic that Bert and Vicky are coming, but to tell them nothing. And also for Malachi to take the kids back to their home, no questions asked, because Isaac is acting according to his will. His with a capital H, as in their God. But to be honest, bro, it makes absolutely no sense for this mechanic to strike a deal with these cult corn kids. If you are the only one who has access to fuel, why not just load it all up and drive the fuck out of town and leave them to rot? You know? Like, dude hung around for 3 years just thinking that, hey, you know, shit's sweet. But, I mean, yikes, this might be a little dark, but I'm wondering if there's an implication here that he hung around as the only adult in town with all of these children because he's into some nasty shit. Yuck. The gas station where the mechanic works is on the outskirts of town, so when Bert and Vicky pull up, he directs them to another city instead of Gatlin. The mechanic's dog hears or sees something in the corn stalks across from the gas station, so he takes off after it, ignoring the mechanic's calls for him to come back. The mechanic is then stalked by childlike giggling and goes to investigate. He ends up finding the bandana that was tied around his dog's neck, and it's soaked with blood. Big yikes. He grabs an iron rod as a weapon and heads into the garage where Malachi and crew are waiting, and they kill the mechanic off screen. But this hit was unsanctioned and went against Isaac's orders. I mean, the mechanic was basically there to not only, you know, provide the kids with fuel, but to serve as kind of a figurehead. Like, hey, here's an adult. Everything's a-okay here, folks. Keep on driving. Nothing to see. So the fact that Malachi took him out against Isaac's orders, maybe that lends a little bit of fire to the pedo smoke. And, you know, this dude had to go. If that's the case, I can understand. But what did the dog do? Why did the dog have to get murked too? Unless these kids are running around with peanut butter in their pants, I don't see the dog having any kind of inappropriate contact. So that seems like unnecessary cruelty. But anyway, Bert and Vicky try to drive to the next town, but the road signs keep changing direction and spinning around and shit. They end up lost and trying to drive through the cornfields to get back to the road, only to end up right back at the garage. So they say, fuck it, and head to Gatlin since it's about 15 miles closer than that next town anyway. We see Isaac giving a sermon in the cornfields about how he who walks behind the rows visited him in his dreams last night. He told him that Joseph would try to escape and that they should kill him, but his body would pollute the corn, so to cast him out into the road instead. He also mentions how outlanders would be sent against them, a man and a woman, and the man would have great power, even greater than that of the blue man, and the camera cuts to the decomposed and desiccated remains of a police officer who's been tied to a corn husk cross. The outlanders must be sacrificed to he who walks behind the rows in order for their harvest to be bountiful. And it's interesting because these kids, they've proven to be pretty self-sufficient. They can exist in this community that they've built on their own for the past 3 years. But as self-sufficient as they may be, they still show that they're still kids at the end of the day, and they need some adult guidance because they lack a certain amount of foresight. If you are worshiping an entity that requires periodic sacrifices, and these sacrifices are adults, why would you kill every single adult in town besides the one creepy mechanic, and then force yourselves to have to rely upon other adults just happening by and capturing them to then sacrifice? That doesn't seem like a recipe for success to me. But on the other hand, being an adult doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have some intelligence, because Bert and Vicky arrive in Gatlin and it's a total ghost town. There are kids watching them from hidden places as they drive through the deserted streets. You would think that after plowing a kid with your fucking car, the first stop you would make as you enter a town would be, to the police station, perhaps, to file a report, try to get help, mention that this kid had his throat slashed before you steamrolled him, so there's some knife-wielding maniac potentially on the loose. But no, they don't even sniff the police station. Instead, they go into the diner where Job was at the beginning of the film, and they try to use the phone there, but it's dead. They look outside and see a few kids trying to steal their car, and they then take off running once they're spotted, so Vicky and Bert hop back into the car and give chase, but lose them. Vicky's like, alright bro, I've seen enough. I think we should get the hell out of here. And Bert's like, alright, yeah, you are probably right. Something is weird around here. But as they are driving out, Bert stops because he sees a door to a house open and shut. So he pulls over to investigate, much to Vicky's chagrin. Bro knocks on the front door and then just walks in when no one answers. Okay. He notices that the phone's line is cut and they find a magazine sitting out that's 3 years old. Bert hears some creeping sounds upstairs and again goes to investigate. And I know I gave Vicky a hard time earlier about doing the absolute most when wanting Bert to propose to her, but now I'm wondering why she would even want to marry this dude to begin with. Not only are his survival instincts total ass, but he's also demonstrated that he's dismissive of Vicky's concerns, her fears, and her feelings and opinions because she wants to leave town, which is 100% the smart thing to do and the right course of action. And he's like, nah, I saw that door over there open and shut, girl. Let's go check it out. Who gives a fuck if the door opened and shut? Right now, the number one priority should be to find some police and report that the kid you left splattered in the road was first slashed and gashed, and so there's some real creepy weird shit going on. But nah, dude is basically just like, trust me bro, I'm a doctor. Bitch, what? Why did he even bother going to medical school to begin with? Clearly his passion lies in being a half-assed detective, and he's doing his best to get everybody killed, but I digress. Anyway, as they navigate through the rooms upstairs in this house, Bert ends up walking into a bedroom and we see a bunch of drawings on the walls, and that's when we realize that they are in Job and Sarah's house. Sarah apparently attended Bert's survival school because she starts playing a record, which alerts them to her location. And so when they go to where she is, they're like, oh, hey there, little girl. What are you doing here? And she has absolutely no concept of stranger danger. And these motherfuckers sure aren't acting like they're the ones trespassing in a stranger's home. They seem hella comfortable. They ask Sarah where her parents are, and she tells them that they're in the cornfield like all the other adults because Isaac put them there. She calls him their leader, and they ask her to take them to him, and she's like, hell nah, that boy is scary. Boyfriend of the year, Dr. Burt gets impatient and says they're wasting time talking in circles with this kid, so he's gonna go to town hall to report the murder. Finally. But he leaves the car keys with Vicky and says that she can stay with Sarah to try to get more information. Now, me personally, the absolute last thing I'm doing in a deserted town after I have already ran down a kid in the road whose throat was slashed previously, I am not going to, 1, walk off anywhere alone, 2, leave my partner alone with some unknown creepy ass kid. Bert's probably still mad about that whack ass birthday cake / cookies / pastries / whatever and that dumbass lighter, but still, we gotta have better survival instincts, bro. Before he leaves, Vicky asks Bert if they're safe here, and he's like, yeah, of course, it's a little weird around here, but we're totally safe. Okay, based on what? Is that your doctor's diagnosis? The town exhibits no symptoms of being dangerous outside of the fact that some kid got murdered in a cornfield before we decimated him with our motor vehicle. But yeah, outside of that, everything is A-okay. So he leaves, and then sure enough, Malachi and crew pull up to the house with their sickles, hammers, cleavers, and other weapons and abduct Vicky. And I don't know, man, Sarah is apparently secretly Banksy because she just leaves artwork all over the place. As Bert is exploring town, he ends up finding one of her drawings of a dragon in a cornfield breathing fire on a woman that kind of resembles Vicky. So he's like, oh shit, that's right, I did leave her totally alone, or I guess with a fucking 6-year-old bodyguard, maybe. So he's like, I guess I should get back to her. So he takes off running running back to the house, but oh, too late, bro. She's already got. Just minutes prior, Sarah had shown Vicky a picture she had drawn of her, and Vicky was like, what the fuck is this? But the audience didn't see the picture until Vicky is dragged off. So then we see it's her in the fields with Malachi and crew, and they've stabbed her. She's bloody, their knives are bloody, and there's like a corn stalk cross set up, and they're apparently preparing to sacrifice her to their corn god. But luckily for Vicky, reality differs slightly from Sarah's drawing. Yes, she is taken to the fields to be sacrificed. The cult puts a little corn husk crown on her head, and they tie her to a corn husk cross, and all the kids are chanting, kill, 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 over and over again, but she wasn't stabbed, so that's a positive. You know, take the wins where you can get them. But you know what? I wonder, is Children of the Corn a Trojan horse messenger for birth control? A Trojan horse for Trojan, if you will. Because what I inferred here is that there seems to be an implication that having kids will kill a woman's body. Vicky is the only one subjected to this kind of treatment, at least on screen. The police officer, we only see the aftermath of that. The mechanic was killed off screen. Even Joseph had his throat slashed off screen. And later on, when someone else is touted to be a sacrifice, we don't have the kill, kill, kill chant breakout. Only Vicky is the one that has all of these elements come together at once. So it seems like there's a target on women. Elsewhere in town, Bert busts into a church looking for Vicky, and he ends up interrupting a ritual where there is a teen named Amos. He's just carved a pentagram into his bare chest, collected the blood into a cup, and other kids are preparing to drink it. Wow, it's this kid's 19th birthday, which officially makes him too old for the cult, so he's preparing to join their corn god, aka he's going to be sacrificed. And Bert's like, hey yo, what the fuck are you kids doing? Are y'all crazy? Yeah, bro, I think they may be a little bit crazy. I mean, this dude just carved a pentagram into his chest and they're drinking his blood like it's a cup of fucking Kool-Aid. So, yeah, maybe you should exit the situation. But this fool Bert allows himself to be surrounded by kids. He tries to take one as a hostage or use her as like a human shield, but he's pretty loose with it, so she ends up wiggling free and stabbing him in the shoulder with the ritualistic corn knife. So he has to take off running from the church as a mob of kids chases him. And respectfully, dude should have been asking way fewer questions and just commenced to slapping those kids. There comes a moment where the villain's motivations or the why ceases to be relevant. Okay, like your girlfriend has been kidnapped, you don't know where she is, and here you are just trying to ask 21 questions about why they're doing what they're doing. What are they reading? What are they reciting? Who gives a fuck, bro? All you need to know is that they're carving pentagrams into their chest and drinking their own blood, okay? But I guess that's supposed to be the doctor in him trying to diagnose the situation. Well, he ends up hiding out in a barn as Malachi comes in with his knife. Bert gets the drop on him by smashing him in the knee with some kind of object or tool. And instead of finishing the job, he turns to run and immediately runs face first into a pole like a dummy. Bruh, what are we doing here? This dude is a fucking goofball, man. How do you run into a pole like some Looney Tunes shit, dog? That is insane. Survival instincts are doo-doo. So Bert stumbles away now, slightly concussed, and Job, who has been following him throughout this whole ordeal, like literally trailing behind him for like an hour, remaining hidden, he finally shows himself and leads Bert to a cellar where he's hiding out with Sarah. It's been stocked with food and other supplies because their dad built it as like a bomb shelter, prepping for when the commies attacked. And this goes back to my earlier point about adults having a certain level of foresight, because daddy came in super clutch. Meanwhile, over in the cornfields, Malachi has lost faith in Isaac and questions his plan. Malachi wants to use Vicky as bait to lure Bert to be captured, but Isaac says, nah, y'all gotta catch him on your own, cause that's what God wants. And Malachi is like, fuck that noise, that is straight cap, my boy, you don't have his favor anymore. And he leads a mutiny. They cut Vicky down from the corn cross and put Isaac in her place. They then drag Vicky through town yelling for Bert to come out. But remember, bro was in a cellar, so he can't exactly hear. So Malachi's like, okay, what if I cut Vicky's face? Will that make you come out? And he does, and she screams, but then he like covers up her mouth immediately. So not quite sure what the point of that was, I guess, outside of just being sadistic. So they end up heading back to the field anyway. Bert patches up his stab wound with the help of the kids, and Job tells him that he knows where the cult took Vicky. So the gang heads out to the clearing in the cornfield. Bert approaches stealthily when night falls, and he grabs a pipe to use as a weapon along the way. The cult summons he who walks behind the rows, and he pulls up like a worm underground. You know, like in Tremors where the worm's just like moving and it's causing the surface of the ground to move with it, but you don't actually see the worm. That's kind of how he's moving right here. And he who walks behind the rows seemingly takes Amos because we hear him scream, but we don't see what happens. But then he envelops Isaac's body. He looks like this radioactive goo, kind of staticky as well. Just this amorphous blob that covers Isaac and then explodes him. Pretty awkward. Bert crashes this sacrificial party and swoops in with his trusty pipe to save the day. He knocks one of the kids straight in the dome and frees Vicky, telling her to run to the barn where Sarah and Job are hiding out. But instead of following her, this motherfucker actually stands there and begins to lecture these kids about making better choices in life. What? Out here acting like it's scared straight, and he's trying to save the at-risk youth, man. He's preaching about how they're dumb for listening to some other kid tell them to kill their parents. He tells them that any religion without love and compassion is a false religion. But before he can get off his soapbox, Malachi attacks him, and finally, Bert says fuck it and starts slapping the shit out of this kid, like literally using his non-stabbed arm to just pimp slap this kid repeatedly. Finally. But Bert still refuses to kill him though, so that he doesn't feed into their delusions of sacrifices. Malachi regains consciousness and starts heading towards Bert before a possessed Isaac pops up, says in his demonic ass voice that he wants him too, and he grabs Malachi by the neck and breaks that shit. Now everybody else is like, okay, maybe this is a little bit too much. Maybe we actually don't want to be part of the cult and worship this corn god who is breaking necks now and possessing dead kids. So yeah, maybe we should get up out of here. And everyone takes off. They end up hiding in the barn as the corn god whips up this storm outside and everyone's freaking out. But Bert asks if anyone has ever tried to hurt the monster before, and Job says yes. The police officer, or the blue man they sacrificed, first pulled up reading a page that he tore out of the Bible, and this page was talking about casting the beast and the false prophet into the lake of fire. And Vicky deduces that this is supposed to translate to them burning down the cornfield. So Bert subsequently puts all the former cult kids to work. He tasks them with finding hoses so they can spray gas all over the field as an accelerant. And Sarah and Job are tasked with finding a glass bottle. And Vicky is tasked with finding a thick rag so that Bert can make a Molotov cocktail. Vicky ends up tearing off a piece of Job's vest and he's like, hey, that's not a rag. I'm not gonna lie, that shit actually was pretty rude. So I understand, like, of all the people's clothes to tear, why couldn't Vicky tear her own clothes if she wanted a rag that badly? Why she gotta fuck up my man's vest? Cause dude was a little bit saucy, you know what I mean? Considering that he's been living in a commune for 3 years with crazy ass kids, the fact that he was able to find some drip is impressive. Bert gets his Molotov assembled and then he grabs a hose, runs out into the field. He needs to attach this hose to like a centralized machine out there that will then disperse the gas sprinkler style. I guess. I don't know what it's called. I mean, I'm a Texan, but I don't know shit about farming. Anyway, as he's running, the corn comes to life and the stalks wrap themselves around his legs and he's getting overwhelmed. But luckily, Big Drip Job shows up and cuts him free. And this motherfucker doesn't even say thank you, bro. He's just like, what are you doing here? Get back to the barn now. And Job's face is like, bitch, I just saved you. And then he actually does say, oh, excuse me. Job is like just being so disrespected by this couple. It's insane. But then this dude, after trying to act like the big hero and wanting to send Job away, he arrives at the sprinkler machine thing and doesn't even know how to operate it, bruh. But luckily, Job stuck around and tells him how to do it. So he gets the hose attached and the gas starts spraying out over the crops, and Bert uses that terrible but now conveniently amazing birthday gift to light the Molotov and toss it out into the field. Well, apparently this dude went to medical school for a reason, because the throw is absolute ass. It falls in the lone dry patch in this entire field. Like, there was only one area to throw it that it wouldn't ignite, and he landed it right dead center there. Crazy. But MVP Job runs out there, retrieves it as the corn god approaches, but he beats him to the spot, picks up the somehow unbroken bottle and returns it to Bert, and he throws it again. This time it does hit the gas and ignite. So yay, now this uncontrollable fire is raging, but hey, they killed the demon, so that's cool. Bert and Vicky, with their new unofficially adopted kids, get to laugh and joke as they prepare to walk to the next town. Their car was disabled earlier because the cult kid shoved a bunch of corn stalks into the engine. So Bert climbs into the front seat of their car to get the map, but one last devoted cult kid is hiding in the back seat with a sickle. This is the same kid that first stabbed Bert in his shoulder with that ritualistic corn dagger. This time, Bert manages to disarm her, then slams the car door in her face, which knocks her out. And he's like, oh man, she's out cold. What do we do? And Vicky says they can send her a get well soon card from Seattle. Boss line right there. And then they dip out. End of movie. This dude Bert started out not even wanting to commit to his girlfriend, and somehow ended things essentially being married and also having 2 adopted children who are probably gonna need a shit ton of therapy. Wow, what a turn of events. But if there's any consolation for Bert, he may get a reprieve pretty soon from this new life that he's been forced into, because he would likely end up in prison. He did commit vehicular manslaughter, let us not forget. And now we can add arson to the list, and I guess child abuse by smashing that car door in old girl's face. But anyway, let's talk themes. So in addition to what we've already touched on earlier, my biggest takeaway from this film is that there's a message here about kids just being hella impressionable and how important it is to have good role models in their lives. So first we had these kids being swayed by some 9-year-old preaching about a demon in the cornfield, and they decided to follow him and kill their parents and do all kinds of crazy shit for 3 years. Okay. Then as soon as Malachi is like, hey Isaac, I'm over you, bro. They're like, all right, bet, let's sacrifice Isaac instead. So they turned on him at the drop of a dime. And then after that, once they saw Isaac come back as a possessed corpse with a demon inhabiting his body, they're like, all right, fuck all this corpse shit. Let's listen to the grown-up after all, and we'll help him burn all this shit to the ground. So yeah, kids are very fickle beings, and it's up to us as the adults/parents to provide that anchor in order to stabilize them until they are able to handle that on their own. And I know that may sound a little obvious, but from what I've observed, I don't think everyone really operates that way. Especially in today's internet age, kids, in my opinion, are being exposed to way too much, way too early in life, and way too often things that are inappropriate for children. It's important to know what or whom is influencing your kids, and too many times it seems like parents have no idea what their kids are actually into, and that leads to some problems. But the screenplay writer George Goldsmith revealed after the release of the film that a lot of the story was actually a metaphor for the Iranian Revolution, with the takeover of the town by religious zealots being based on the Ayatollah Khomeini and his Revolutionary Guard taking over Iran, with Bert and Vicky being analogous to the American hostages. Goldsmith wanted to use a horror film to expose the dangers of religious fundamentalism. I'm gonna be honest, bro, I didn't pick up on any of that shit, okay? I was born in 1990. The Iranian Revolution is not something that occupies a lot of space in my mental Rolodex. But I do definitely agree that religious fundamentalism can be highly dangerous. I mean, you can essentially close your eyes, pick a war, and land somewhere that has to do with blood being spilled over religious fundamentalism. The fact is, there are no facts when it comes to religion. It's all based on what you believe, and that's perfectly fine. But to operate as if these things are facts can be dangerous. There is no way to prove the existence of heaven unless you die and see for yourself, but unfortunately we haven't yet figured out how to communicate scientific findings from the afterlife. So yeah, until that happens, we just gotta take a stab in the dark. That's all for me. I'll see you in 2 weeks for the next Stephen King adaptation breakdown, but surprise, I'll also see you a little bit sooner than that, as next week I'll be joined by my friends from the Macabre Mondays podcast as we chop up a little bonus film, the biggest hit of 2026, Obsession. You won't want to miss that. So subscribe, comment, rate wherever you listen to podcasts, tap in with Terrorific. But in the meantime, remember, always keep it spooky.